The air crackled with a residual, ozone-laced static, a lingering bruise on the fabric of reality that only a few truly understood. Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, took a slow, deliberate breath, the stale scent of diesel and cheap synthetic cleaners, a jarring contrast to the clean, sterile snap of his former dimension's laboratories. His crimson gaze, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, swept across the landscape. Towers of glass and steel pierced a bruised late-afternoon sky, dominated by one colossal monolith emblazoned with a V that seemed to sneer down at the sprawling, indifferent metropolis below. This was not the broken, war-torn Europe he knew, nor the vibrant, if misguided, idealism of the world he had just departed. This was something else entirely, a monument to a different, perhaps more insidious, form of control. Around him, the 7 hydra operatives who had followed him through the quantum tear were already moving with chilling efficiency. Cloaked in advanced stealth suits that shimmered, distorting light and sound, they secured the dilapidated industrial warehouse they had materialized in, their every movement a testament to years of rigorous, brutal training. No screaming civilians, no frantic military response, no blaring sirens. Only the distant, muted roar of an unfamiliar city. The breach had been precise, silent, and most importantly, unseen by the global powers that be. A new game board laid out for a new master. Red Skull's mind, a labyrinth of strategic genius and ideological fanaticism, was already processing terabytes of new data. From the flickering digital billboards that plastered the urban canyons with smiling, impossibly perfect faces, to the garish, costumed figures soaring across news feeds on recovered devices, the message was clear. Power here was not merely wielded, it was commodified, packaged and sold. The heroes were brands, their every heroic act meticulously choreographed, their flaws meticulously hidden. He watched a news report detailing the courageous rescue by a blonde, blue-eyed Titan, Homelander, from what appeared to be a remarkably staged bank robbery. The casualty count was brushed over, the corporate logo of Vault International gleaming above the spectacle. It was a grotesque pantomime, a mockery of true strength and ideological purity. Yet, beneath the cynical veneer, Red Skull recognized a potent, malleable force. "Report, operative," Red Skull's voice, a gravelly rasp cut through the silence, devoid of emotion. A hydra agent, their face obscured by a sleek, black visor, stepped forward, a data pad in hand. Initial scans confirm a dimensional displacement of approximately 27.3 light-years, Earth-like, gravitational, and atmospheric conditions. Local communications networks are saturated with propaganda surrounding a corporation named Warlords International. They appear to control all major superhuman assets globally, leveraging them for entertainment, defense contracts, and political influence. Public knowledge of the compound V serum responsible for these powers is recent, causing widespread societal unease. The timeline appears to be congruent with a period of post-revelation damage control by Vought. Red Skull listened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Superhumans, he mused, the word a bitter taste. Corporate products, not superior beings, a world ripe for true order. This was not the raw, untamed power he might have expected, but a highly regulated, thoroughly corrupted version. It presented a different kind of challenge, but one his ideology was uniquely suited to exploit. The chaos, the fear, the underlying resentment of the populace towards these soups. It was fertile ground. This was a society already fractured, craving meaning, susceptible to a new vision, a true vision. Their immediate priority was clear, absolute discretion. Unlike their previous world, where the pursuit of cosmic power and global domination was often overt, here, power wore a corporate suit and smiled for the cameras. To reveal themselves prematurely would be to invite the attention of both the grotesque heroes and the insidious corporate entity that controlled them. Both, Red Skull surmised, would be equally primitive in their response, either an attempt at recruitment into their pantomime or outright elimination. Neither was acceptable. Hydra would not be a pawn in a corporate game. They would be the architects of a new one. The operative continued, displaying satellite imagery. Vought Tower designated Objective Alpha. It is their central command, housing their executive offices, PR departments, and facilities for their premier superhero team, the Seven. Surveillance systems are extensive but not impenetrable. They appear to prioritize broad public perception over deep-level covert threats. Amateurish, Red Skull scoffed. A fortress built on lies and celebrity worship. They see only what they wish to see. His strategy began to coalesce. Unlike the Cosmic Cube or the Tesseract, Compound Phi was a systemic, almost mundane evil distributed and controlled by a corporation. It was not a mystical force, but a scientific concoction, albeit one with unpredictable results. This meant it could be understood, replicated, and most importantly, weaponized on a scale Vought itself had not yet comprehended. He envisioned a hydra with its own super soldiers, not genetically enhanced aberrations, but loyal, ideologically pure warriors, their powers a tool for global order, not corporate profit. The chaotic, emotionally unstable Homelander, a god with the temperament of a spoiled child, represented the epitome of Vaught's failure. Red Skull knew how to tame such creatures or, failing that, how to eliminate them. The Hydra team set up a secure, encrypted communication line back to their makeshift command center within the warehouse. Their specialized equipment, salvaged from their previous dimension, began siphoning data from local networks, bypassing Vaught's initial layers of digital security. They sought blueprints, personnel files, financial records, anything that could offer an advantage. Red Skull understood that in this new battlefield, information was the most potent weapon. He needed to understand Vaught's internal mechanisms, their weaknesses, their key players, and the nature of their precious Compound V. A plan began to form, cold and precise: infiltration, manipulation, exploitation. Vought International believed it controlled heroes. Red Skull would show them what true control looked like. He would expose the rot at the heart of their empire and replace it with something far more disciplined, far more absolute. This was not a world of good versus evil, but a world of chaos versus order. And Red Skull had always been the bringer of a terrible, beautiful order. The Vought logo on the screen seemed to tremble under his unwavering gaze, a beast unaware of the serpent that had just slithered into its lair. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. From the shadowed depths of their makeshift base, Hydra began its quiet, systematic dissection of Vought International. Red Skull understood that a direct assault on a corporation that commanded literal gods was suicide. Instead, he initiated a campaign of surgical infiltration, leveraging Hydra's unparalleled expertise in espionage, cyber warfare, and psychological manipulation. Vaught's hubris, built on the bedrock of public adoration and unquestioned power, was their greatest vulnerability. They monitored social media, tracked competitors' stock prices, and censored dissenting voices, but they were fundamentally unprepared for an enemy that operated entirely outside their corporate paradigm. They mistook a ghost for a glitch. The Hydra operatives, moving like wraiths through the urban jungle, deployed miniature drones disguised as mundane surveillance equipment. Pigeons, streetlights, even discarded plastic bags snagged in wind currents that fed a constant stream of data back to their encrypted servers. They infiltrated public Wi-Fi networks, bypassed municipal CCTV, and even developed bespoke algorithms to sift through the overwhelming noise of Vaught's own public data, searching for anomalies. Their targets were not just the superhumans themselves, but the meticulously constructed infrastructure that supported them. The Compound V labs, the PR departments, the legal teams, the executive suites, and the very narrative they spun for the world. Red Skull spent hours analyzing footage of the Seven. Homelander in particular fascinated him. The man was a volatile cocktail of immense power and profound psychological fragility, driven by an insatiable need for adulation. He was a weapon, certainly, but a weapon with a faulty trigger and no master. Red Skull contrasted Homelander's public persona with the raw, brutal efficiency he sometimes exhibited off-camera, caught by Hydra's deeper, less broadcast-focused surveillance. This was not a hero, this was a terror wrapped in an American flag, precisely the kind of false idol Red Skull delighted in dismantling. The other supes were equally revealing: A-Train's desperation and drug dependency, the Deep's pathetic insecurities, Maeve's jaded cynicism, and Starlight's burgeoning disillusionment. They were not paragons, but deeply flawed, damaged individuals, their powers merely amplifying their human vices. Their fundamental flaw, Red Skull observed, to his lead analyst, a stern woman named Agent Richter, her voice a monotone through the comms, is their reliance on Compound Phi as their sole source of power. They understand its effects, but not its true potential, nor its inherent instability. They treat it as a product, not a force of nature to be mastered. Richter's reply was clinical. Our analysis confirms Vought maintains strict control over Compound V distribution and research. However, there are numerous leaked documents, mostly from early Phase 1 trials, indicating inconsistent results, severe side effects, and a high mortality rate among test subjects. Current iterations appear more stable, but long-term effects on adult users, particularly those who gain powers later in life, are still largely unknown. There's also significant intellectual property protection around its formula, but our cryptology teams are making progress. Hydra's focus extended beyond just the supes. They began to profile key Vought executives. Stan Edgar, the former CEO, was identified as the cold, calculating mind behind Vaught's corporate empire, a non-powered individual who wielded more actual control than any supe. His dismissal, a public relations coup for Homelander, was a fascinating study in corporate power shifts and underlying weaknesses. Ashley Barrett, the perpetually stressed CEO, was easy to categorize: a sycophant, terrified of Homelander, driven by corporate ambition and easily manipulated through fear. The weaknesses were glaringly obvious. Vought was a house of cards, its foundations built on lies and held together by the brittle thread of public perception. The espionage wasn't merely about gathering information, it was about preparing the ground for future operations. Hydra's cyber operatives began to plant sleeper cells of code deep within Vaught's extensive digital infrastructure. These weren't designed to trigger alarms, but to lie dormant, ready to siphon specific data streams, manipulate financial records, or even subtly alter Vaught's own internal reports when the time was right. They studied Vaught's security protocols, their media manipulation tactics, and their network of politicians and lobbyists. Every piece of information was a thread in the vast, tangled web of Vaught's power, and Red Skull intended to unravel it completely. Red Skull also instructed his teams to gather intelligence on any emerging anti-Vought factions. The existence of the Boys, a shadowy vigilante group, was noted with interest. While their methods were crude and their resources limited, their visceral hatred for supes and their understanding of Vaught's corruption made them a potential, albeit unpredictable, variable. They were a symptom of the societal decay Red Skull intended to capitalize on, a raw nerve that could be pressed. However, direct contact was premature. They were too visible, too emotional. Hydra dealt in precision, not passion. The public's perception of these heroes is largely dictated by what Vought allows them to see, Red Skull mused, observing a fabricated Vought news network segment praising Homelander's latest PR stunt, delivering turkeys to a homeless shelter. They've created a reality, a simulacrum of heroism, But beneath the surface, there is widespread resentment, even terror. The compound V revelation has shattered some of the illusion, but Vort's control over the narrative is still immense. Agent Richter provided a grim assessment. Our psychological profiles of the populace indicate a strong desire for genuine protection, but also a deep-seated fear of anything that threatens their manufactured sense of security. They are susceptible to strong leadership, even when it is morally bankrupt, provided it offers stability and a clear enemy. Indeed, Red Skull replied, a cold glint in his eye. They are sheep, and Vort has merely dressed its wolves in sheep's clothing. Hydra will offer them a shepherd, a true authority. He understood that the people of this dimension, accustomed to a steady diet of manipulated truths, were primed for a new master, one who promised order and exposed the hypocrisy of the old. But first, he needed a lever, a way to truly destabilize Vort from within. That lever, he suspected, lay deep within their cherished Compound 5 research and the ambitious, morally flexible minds who guarded its secrets. The groundwork was laid, the shadows deepened. Vort remained oblivious, a colossal entity dancing to a tune it believed it composed, while an unseen orchestra began to play a far more ominous symphony. The insidious work of infiltration began not with brute force, but with the quiet corrosion of trust and ambition. Red Skull, leveraging Hydra's deep understanding of human psychology, understood that the most formidable walls were often breached from within. He constructed a meticulously crafted persona, Dr. Victor Schmidt, a brilliant, disgraced German geneticist with a controversial past in biotech, seeking redemption and new opportunities in the booming American superhero industry. His fabricated credentials, woven through layers of deepfake academic records and defunct offshore companies, would pass even Vaught's cursory background checks, designed more to vet public-facing talent than uncover genuine threats. Dr. Victor Schmidt emerged from the shadows not as a direct applicant to Vaught's top-tier R&D, which would instantly draw too much scrutiny, but as a consultant for a struggling pharmaceutical subsidiary, one Vought was quietly considering acquiring. This gave him a legitimate, albeit tangential, entry point into the corporate ecosystem, far from the glare of Homelander's heat vision or the scrutinizing eyes of Vaught's upper echelon. His expertise, initially applied to optimizing obscure drug trials, quickly garnered attention from middle management eager to impress their superiors. Red Skull's targets were carefully chosen: ambitious, underappreciated scientists, mid-level executives desperate for a promotion, and administrative staff privy to sensitive information, often overlooked and resentful. He didn't offer outright bribes, but rather something far more potent: validation, recognition, and the illusion of shared purpose. One such target was Dr. Elena Petrova, a brilliant but disillusioned geneticist toiling in a Compound V derivative lab, perpetually overlooked for promotions due to her quiet demeanor and refusal to engage in corporate politicking. Schmidt observed her for weeks, studying her frustrations, her quiet dedication to her work despite the crushing bureaucracy, and her deep-seated ethical unease with some of Vaught's more morally dubious projects. He approached her under the guise of intellectual curiosity, engaging her in stimulating conversations about theoretical gene editing and the untapped potential of Compound V, discussions she hadn't had in years within Vaught's rigid, profit-driven environment. The true potential of Vaught's primary asset, Compound V, is being squandered, Schmidt lamented to Dr. Petrova over a meticulously curated, seemingly accidental coffee break. His voice, modulated to a resonant baritone, was persuasive, laced with a subtle German accent that lent an air of intellectual authority. They treat it as a mere enhancement, a formula for parlor tricks, but it is a key, Dr. Petrova, to unlocking the very essence of human potential, to truly evolve. Dr. Petrova, initially guarded, found herself drawn into his intellectual orbit. Schmidt listened intently, offering genuine insights, critiquing Vort's short-sightedness and subtly fanning the flames of her professional discontent. He didn't overtly criticize Vort, but rather presented himself as a visionary frustrated by corporate ineptitude. Imagine, he would muse, if the unpredictability could be engineered, the side effects mitigated, the very essence of the power tailored. Vort merely sprinkles fairy dust. They do not truly command the magic. He observed that Homelander, while terrifying to his subordinates, rarely delved into the minutiae of Compound 5 research or corporate espionage. His interest lay solely in his own image, his power, and the adulation of the masses. This psychological blind spot was a gaping wound in Vought's defenses, one Red Skull intended to widen. Homelander was a blunt instrument, Schmidt was a surgeon. Through Dr. Petrova, Schmidt gained peripheral access to lower-level Compound V research data, outdated files, discarded hypotheses, the failures Vort had deemed irrelevant, but which Red Skull saw as invaluable. Hydra's analysts working in their covert lab began piecing together the fragmented information, reverse engineering Vort's understanding of the serum, and identifying critical gaps in their knowledge. Concurrently, another operative, masquerading as a high-powered corporate auditor, began exploiting the ambitions of a mid-level Vort financial executive named Thomas Miller. Miller was deeply entrenched in the network of shell corporations Vort used to launder money and hide liabilities. The operative, Mr. Thorne, offered Miller a chance to discreetly siphon off funds from these hidden accounts, promising him a path to financial independence and deniability. Thorne presented it as a way to expose Vort's corruption, subtly appealing to Miller's latent, if buried, sense of morality, while primarily playing on his greed. "Vort will swallow you whole, Thomas," Thorne would say, his voice smooth and reassuring, a stark contrast to the high-pressure environment Miller endured. "They will take your youth, your ethics, and leave you with nothing but a golden parachute made of lies. But you, Thomas, you have the chance to carve out your own empire from the ruins of theirs." Miller, terrified of Homelander and utterly cynical about Vought, saw Thorne not as a tempter, but as a lifeline. He began providing Hydra with access to Vought's internal financial ledgers, unmasking the complex web of offshore accounts, bribed politicians, and suppressed lawsuits. These documents, scrubbed of any identifiable Hydra fingerprints, would serve as devastating ammunition when the time was right. Red Skull also cultivated a network of informants within Vort's sprawling media and public relations departments. Here, he targeted individuals who were weary of spinning lies, disgusted by the inherent hypocrisy, and burdened by the collateral damage their heroes inflicted. He would subtly introduce them to independent, albeit Hydra-funded, investigative journalists who offered a platform for their suppressed truths, promising anonymity and protection. These individuals, believing they were fighting Vought from the inside, were unwittingly becoming conduits for Hydra's controlled narrative, ready to unleash damning stories that would erode public trust further. The genius of Red Skull's approach lay in its multifaceted nature. He wasn't just stealing data, he was sowing discord, cultivating dissent, and building a parallel hidden infrastructure within Vought itself. Each manipulated individual believed they were acting for their own self-interest, or for a greater good, never suspecting they were merely cogs in a far grander, more sinister machine. He exploited Vought's corporate culture of fear and ambition, turning its own employees into unwitting agents of its destruction. As weeks turned into a month, Dr. Victor Schmidt became a quiet, respected fixture in the periphery of Vought's scientific circles. He never demanded, only inquired, never stole overtly, only borrowed, and collaborated. He compiled a vast library of Compound V data, including early formulations, failure rates, and biological markers unique to its interaction with human physiology. This raw data, combined with the financial records and public relations insights, gave Red Skull an unprecedented understanding of Vort's inner workings. He was not just seeing the monster, he was dissecting it, cell by cell. The serpent had indeed slithered into the heart of the beast, and it was beginning to tighten its coils. Vort, preoccupied with quarterly reports and Homelander's latest tantrum, remained blissfully unaware of the true predator in its midst. Homelander was a man accustomed to being the sun around which all things revolved. His power was absolute, his image worshipped, and his every whim catered to by a terrified corporate machine. So when a faint, almost imperceptible dissonance began to hum beneath the glossy veneer of Vought International, it grated on his already fragile psyche like fingernails on a chalkboard. It wasn't a direct challenge, not a flashy new soup trying to steal his thunder. It was subtler, more insidious, a feeling, a scent of something uncontrolled that pricked at his hypersensitive senses. He first noticed it in the margins, a slight dip in Vought stock that defied explanation by Ashley, who blamed market volatility. A momentary lapse in a security feed in a non-critical sector of Vought Tower, dismissed as a network hiccup. The unusual enthusiasm in Dr. Petrova's voice during a casual chat with another scientist about novel genetic pathways that weren't Vought-sanctioned research. These were tiny cracks, nearly invisible, but Homelander felt them like fissures in his perfect world. He saw everything, heard everything, and the absence of a clear, identifiable threat was far more unsettling than a dozen armed super-terrorists. Ashley, Homelander's voice, a silk-lined whip, cut through the buzzing tension of his latest photo shoot with a traumatized-looking model. Tell me again about the projections for Vought International's Q3 revenue, and be precise. Ashley Barrett, perpetually on the verge of a full-blown nervous breakdown, smoothed her immaculate suit jacket, her hands trembling slightly as she consulted her tablet. Homelander, sir, the projections remain strong, very strong. We're slightly down by 0.7% in the military contracts division, but that's entirely due to increased competition, as we've discussed. She avoided his gaze, knowing even a flicker of uncertainty could invite his wrath. She hadn't been able to explain to him why a supposedly minor Vought subsidiary had experienced an almost undetectable leak of outdated research schematics, or why several mid-level employees suddenly seemed more confident, less terrified than usual. Homelander's smile didn't reach his eyes. Competition, he drawled, his voice dropping an octave, making the air in the room feel heavy. There is no competition for Vought, Ashley. There is me, and anything that affects Vaught's bottom line affects me. He gestured vaguely towards a wall of screens displaying Vaught's various media holdings. I'm seeing too many stories about anomalies. Little things. Nothing big enough to warrant my attention, but enough to muddy the waters. His heat vision flared, scorching a precise tiny hole through the expensive lens of a nearby camera. The photographer flinched, biting back a scream. Fix it, Homelander commanded, his eyes still burning, the raw power just beneath the surface terrifying. Fix the anomalies before I decide to fix you. The threat hung in the air, a palpable weight. Ashley swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had dismissed the subtle shifts as part of the chaotic corporate reality of Vought, where infighting and backstabbing were as common as compound V-induced powers. But Homelander's attention, his acute, paranoid awareness, was now laser-focused. He was searching for a physical threat he could destroy, a visible enemy he could obliterate. Red Skull, however, was playing a different game entirely. From the relative obscurity of a sub-basement lab, Dr. Victor Schmidt observed Homelander's public appearances with a calculating eye. Hydra's network of discrete cameras, audio bugs, and compromised Vought internal communication systems allowed Red Skull to monitor the soup's increasingly volatile behavior. He noted the subtle escalation of Homelander's public outbursts, the tighter grip he exerted on Vaught's narrative, and the almost childish rage when his authority was questioned. This wasn't the behavior of a strategic leader, but of a cornered animal, albeit one with the power of a god. "Homelander is beginning to sense our presence," Red Skull stated to Agent Richter, his face impassive. "His primal instincts are detecting a threat he cannot categorize. This is precisely what we desire." "His methods of inquiry are unsubtle," Richter replied, displaying footage of Homelander interrogating a junior Vought scientist by hovering inches from his face, his heat vision warming the man's scalp. The scientist, terrified, had babbled about a new consultant and restructuring of the genetics division, but nothing concrete. "He searches for a brute force solution to a nuanced problem," Red Skull agreed, a rare hint of disdain in his tone. "He is used to punching his way through obstacles. An ideological war, an infiltration from within, is beyond his comprehension. He will grow increasingly agitated, making him impulsive, and impulsiveness, in a being of his power, is a liability we can exploit." Red Skull, as Dr. Schmidt, even had a brief, almost meaningless encounter with Homelander in a Vought cafeteria. Homelander, grabbing a plate of what passed for healthy food, had brushed past Schmidt, his eyes scanning the room, always searching, always suspicious. Schmidt, wearing a bland lab coat and carrying a stack of scientific journals, had offered a polite, almost obsequious nod, his expression carefully neutral. Homelander hadn't even registered him, looking right through him, his mind already fixated on a deeper, unseen threat. The encounter reinforced Red Skull's conviction. To Homelander, a true rival had to be loud, flashy, and directly challenging. A quiet, unassuming scientist was beneath his notice, a mere background character in his grand, self-aggrandizing drama. This deliberate invisibility was Hydra's most potent shield. The whispers continued, a data server mysteriously wiped of minor project files, a pharmaceutical order misplaced, a highly sensitive internal memo discussing a burgeoning anti-soup sentiment in Midwestern states accidentally leaked to a local blog before being immediately scrubbed. Each incident was minor, easily explained away by Vault's overburdened IT or PR teams as human error. But they were designed by Hydra to be just enough to keep Homelander on edge, to sow seeds of doubt and paranoia, to make him look for ghosts where there were only shadows. Homelander began making unscheduled visits to various Vault departments, his presence radiating menace. He would sweep into a lab, his uniform pristine, his smile wide and unsettling, and simply watch the scientists, his enhanced senses straining for any hint of malfeasance. He tried to intimidate, to coerce information, but the Hydra agents embedded within the corporate structure were too disciplined, too well-trained to break. They maintained their covers flawlessly, their inner Hydra loyalty unshakable, even under the terrifying gaze of America's greatest hero. The lack of a concrete enemy began to truly unravel Homelander. He was a predator without prey, an apex, being whose finely tuned senses detected a disturbance in the Force, but whose blunt instrument intellect couldn't identify its source. He paced his luxurious Vought apartment, the city lights a glittering tapestry outside his window, his mind racing. Someone was playing games, someone was chipping away at his Vought, his control. He crushed a remote control in his fist, the plastic snapping under his inhuman strength, a primal growl rumbling in his chest. He would find them, and when he did, he would unleash a fury that would make every single minor anomaly seem like a children's tea party. Red Skull, watching from the digital ether, merely smiled. Homelander was becoming a tool in his own right, a volatile agent of chaos that would, in due time, pave the way for Hydra's ascendance. Billy Butcher smelled a rat, and it wasn't the usual compound V-addled corporate shilling kind. His nose, finely tuned to the scent of bullshit and clandestine operations, had been twitching for weeks. It started subtly, with Frenchie picking up chatter on the dark web about highly advanced, untraceable weaponry flooding the black market. Not Vault tech, not even rip-offs, something different. Then came the whisper of certain high-profile individuals within Vault suddenly becoming uncooperative or disappearing without Homelander-level fanfare. It was too clean, too organized. "All right, you wankers, listen up," Butcher grunted, slamming a lukewarm can of Red Bull onto the grimy table in the boys' bunker. Huey flinched, jumping in his seat. Kimiko, ever silent, merely watched with intense focus, while Frenchie meticulously cleaned the chamber of a modified assault rifle. ever the voice of reason, sighed, already anticipating the madness. "We've been chasing soup-sized turds for so long, we forgot there's other kinds of shit out there," Butcher continued, gesturing wildly with the Red Bull. "Frenchie's found some fancy new toys hitting the streets. Not Vault, not your usual Russian garbage. This stuff is slick, too slick, and it's not just tech. There's chatter about some corporate types suddenly going rogue, leaking sensitive info about Vault's off-book assets, but it's not the boys, and it sure as shit ain't Starlight's Bleeding Heart Brigade." Frenchie piped up, a frown creasing his brow. "Mon ami, the encryption on these weapons, it is beautiful, no? Like layers of a very complex onion. And the components, they are not from this world, I think, or at least not from this century's known suppliers, very advanced. And the leaks, they are like perfect little bombs, targeted to cause maximum chaos, but not aimed at Homelander directly. It is like someone is preparing the battlefield." Huey, ever the moral compass, chimed in. "Preparing the battlefield for what, Butcher? Another soup civil war? Another corporate takeover? Or something worse?" He still carried the weight of Compound Vi in his system, the occasional teleportation giving him a visceral understanding of the horrors they faced and a lingering fear of its lethal toll. "Worse is always an option, Huey," Butcher retorted, a grim set to his jaw. "Worse is usually the default. I got a sniff from a contact in the feds, some analyst who got too close to a financial irregularity at Vault, said it was like someone had taken a scalpel to their books, surgically removing bits, replacing others, not a sledgehammer like us, a fucking laser pointer." ever pragmatic, studied the schematics Frenchie projected on the screen, intricate diagrams of energy weapons and cloaking devices that seemed to defy current understanding. "These aren't soup-made, Billy. This is disciplined military-grade tech, beyond even Vault's usual R&D. And if someone's embedding themselves in Vault's finances and research without setting off Homelander, then we've got a whole new beast to deal with, a beast that plays a completely different game." The truth was, this new threat was deeply unsettling to Butcher. He understood soups, understood the corporate corruption that spawned them. He understood brute force, emotional manipulation, and cynical pragmatism. But this felt like something alien, something cold and ideological that operated with an unnerving, almost inhuman precision. It wasn't about fame or money or even raw power in the way Homelander craved it. It felt like something far more fundamental, far more dangerous. "Right," Butcher decided, his eyes narrowing. "Kimiko, you and Frenchie hit up some of these new black market contacts. See if you can trace where these fancy pop guns are coming from. Huey, you try to dig into any weird, untraceable digital footprints around Vault, anything that doesn't scream Homelander cover-up. You and I are going to lean on some of my old CIA contacts. See if anyone's got a sniff of some new, well-funded boogeyman walking among us. Someone who gives even the company the creeps." The boys, accustomed to battling the visible monstrosities of Vault, were now confronted with an enemy that existed largely in the shadows. This was a war of whispers and algorithms, of subtle manipulation and unseen infiltration, a battlefield far removed from the explosive confrontations with the Seven. Butcher, for all his bravado, recognized the profound difference. Homelander was a localized pathogen destroying everything in his immediate vicinity. This new enemy felt like a virus, slowly replicating, quietly corrupting, and subtly preparing for a full system takeover. During their investigations, Kimiko and Frenchie encountered a minor skirmish in a forgotten warehouse district. Not between soups, but between a group of heavily armed street thugs wielding the advanced, untraceable energy weapons and a contingent of Vault security personnel who were clearly outmatched. The energy weapons, sleek and silent, melted through Vault's Kevlar with disturbing ease. Kimiko, with her enhanced strength, intervened, disarming several thugs with brutal efficiency, but not before observing their chilling discipline. They weren't typical street criminals. They fought with a coordinated ruthlessness, a tactical precision that spoke of extensive training. They were different, mon coeur, Frenchie reported back, still shaken despite his years of violence. No fear, like machines, and their weapons, they did not just kill, they disintegrated, cleanly. This observation cemented Butcher's growing unease. These weren't just criminals with new toys, these were trained operatives, and their tech was unlike anything Vought, or even the most advanced military, currently possessed. He found himself confronted with a chilling thought. What if Vought, the ultimate evil in his world, was merely a smaller beast compared to the one now stirring in the shadows? He hated soups, hated Vought, but he understood their motivations. Greed, celebrity, power for its own sake. This new element felt like something far more ideological, something that aimed not just to control, but to redefine. A different kind of monster, Butcher, mused later, reviewing Frenchie's combat footage. One that doesn't fly around in capes but moves in the dark. And that, frankly, scares me more than Homelander. Butcher merely grunted, staring at the blurry image of a hydra symbol, a stylized octopus, briefly visible on one of the discarded weapons before it self-destructed. Don't kid yourself, there's always a bigger shark in the water. We just found out there's a fucking kraken. His crusade against soups was still paramount, but a new, more shadowy enemy had emerged, forcing him to reconsider the very nature of the battle. This wasn't just about killing Homelander, it was about preventing something far more ancient and terrifying from taking root in an already broken world. The boys were about to enter a war they hadn't even known existed, against an ideology so pervasive, so disciplined, that it made Vault's corporate evil look like amateur hour. Deep within a heavily shielded sub-level laboratory, far beneath the bustling, oblivious streets, the true extent of Hydra's ambition began to manifest. Red Skull, as Dr. Victor Schmidt, had meticulously cultivated his relationship with Dr. Elena Petrova, steering her towards unorthodox experiments on Compound V. He didn't demand the formula outright, but rather encouraged her intellectual curiosity, pushing her to explore the serum's inherent mutability and its unpredictable genetic pathways. Under his subtle guidance, Petrova, believing she was on the cusp of a scientific breakthrough that would finally grant her recognition, began to synthesize variations of Compound V. These weren't Vault's stable, marketable doses, but experimental batches designed to push the boundaries of genetic manipulation. Red Skull provided her with obscure research papers, supposedly from defunct Soviet-era programs, which were, in reality, carefully curated Hydra doctrines on human augmentation. He subtly introduced the concept of power regulation and loyalty integration into their discussions, framing it as a way to optimize soup creation to prevent the kind of chaotic, unstable results embodied by Homelander. The key, Dr. Petrova, Schmidt explained, his voice a low, persuasive hum over the whirring of centrifuges, is not merely to bestow power, but to control it, to ensure that the enhancement serves a higher purpose, a disciplined will. Vaught's methodology is crude, relying on chance. We, however, can engineer destiny. Petrova, consumed by the allure of scientific discovery and the intellectual validation Schmidt provided, became an unwitting accomplice. She produced small, volatile batches of compound V tailored to specific genetic markers provided by Schmidt, markers designed by Hydra to identify individuals with latent but strong, compliant genetic profiles. These test subjects were not high-profile recruits, but desperate, disenfranchised individuals rounded up by Hydra operatives through their burgeoning criminal network. They were the anonymous, the forgotten, perfect for clandestine experimentation. The results were predictably horrifying. Hydra's initial attempts to create their own super soldiers were fraught with failure, a testament to the inherent unpredictability of Compound V when decoupled from Vaught's proprietary stabilization agents. Some test subjects simply died, their bodies dissolving into viscous goo. Others mutated into grotesque, unstable forms, their newfound powers uncontrollable and self-destructive. One subject, imbued with enhanced strength, tore himself apart in a berserk rage, coating the sterile lab walls in blood and gore. Another, granted the ability to emit sonic blasts, ruptured his own vocal cords and brain stem in a cacophony of agony. Red Skull observed these failures with cold, detached interest. "Analysis, Richter," he commanded, his crimson eyes unblinking behind the sterile glass of the observation chamber. "What is the biological impediment to stable integration and ideological compliance?" Agent Richter, overseeing the gruesome spectacle, reported with clinical precision. The current compound V variations induce extreme cellular instability and neurological degradation in subjects who lack pre-existing genetic markers compatible with Vaught's core formula. Without those specific genetic predispositions, or Vaught's proprietary stabilizers, the powers manifest chaotically, often with lethal autoimmune responses. Furthermore, the trauma of the transformation often overwhelms their existing psychological profile, making ideological re-education extremely difficult. The corporate corruption of Vought now became a twisted asset for Hydra. Red Skull realized that Vaught's success wasn't just about their formula, it was about their decades of hidden research, their understanding of which genetic lineages responded best to Compound V, and their brutal, often covert selection process for candidates. He couldn't replicate that overnight. He needed Vaught's deeper secrets, their full catalog of genetic profiles, and their complete, stabilized formula. This revelation spurred Red Skull to intensify his pressure on Vaught. He activated more of his embedded assets. Thomas Miller, the financial executive, began subtly rerouting small, untraceable sums of Vault money into ghost accounts, then into Hydra's offshore network, weakening Vault's financial standing from within. The investigative journalists, unknowingly controlled by Hydra, began publishing sensational, meticulously sourced leaks about Vaught's early, unethical Compound V trials, complete with damning testimonies from former low-level employees. These leaks, specifically designed to bypass Vaught's immediate legal countermeasures by targeting smaller, less reputable but widely read online news aggregators, caused a ripple effect of public mistrust. They weren't enough to bring Vaught down, but they chipped away at the corporation's carefully cultivated image, forcing Ashley Barrett into endless, frantic damage control. Homelander, feeling the subtle erosion of public adoration, began to lash out. He saw the leaks as a personal affront, an attack on his legacy. His public appearances became more erratic, his speeches veering into barely disguised threats. He publicly humiliated several Vought employees for perceived slights, his smile growing increasingly strained. This was precisely what Red Skull wanted. Homelander's volatility destabilizing the very corporation he supposedly protected, creating an even greater climate of fear and chaos. "Let him rage," Red Skull instructed Richter, watching a news report of Homelander violently dispersing a small protest outside Vought Tower. "His tantrums create fissures, we are merely widening them." He pushed Dr. Petrova to seek access to Vaught's restricted archives, the comprehensive genetic database of all known soups, including their predispositions, power fluctuations, and documented weaknesses. He framed it as crucial for understanding how to prevent future Homelander-like failures. Petrova, now deeply invested in her research and convinced Schmidt was her intellectual ally against Vought's corporate oppression, began devising a plan to gain access. The irony was palpable. Vought's corporate security, designed to protect their intellectual property from external threats and disgruntled employees, was now being compromised by the very intellectual ambitions it had fostered and then stifled. The Compound V conundrum was both a challenge and an opportunity. Hydra could not simply create an army of obedient supes overnight. But by exploiting Vaught's existing research, by understanding the delicate balance between genetic predisposition and the serum itself, Red Skull could turn Vaught's greatest asset into its gravest liability. He would either corrupt it for his own ends, or he would unleash its chaotic potential against Vought itself, watching the corporate gods destroy each other, leaving a power vacuum for Hydra to fill. The path to a truly disciplined superhuman army lay not in reinventing the wheel, but in stealing the master blueprint. And Vought, blinded by its own avarice and celebrity worship, was slowly but surely handing him the keys. The city simmered, a crucible of simmering discontent and manufactured heroism. Vought was bleeding, not from a single fatal wound, but from 1,000 tiny cuts inflicted by Hydra's insidious campaign. The leaks concerning unethical Compound V trials had gone viral, forcing Vought into a desperate, transparently false PR offensive. Homelander's erratic behavior, increasingly caught on phone cameras and amplified by Hydra's social media bots, further chipped away at his godlike image. Yet, despite the chaos, Vought remained a colossus, its grip on power undeniable. Red Skull knew a direct confrontation was still premature. He needed to fracture its internal structure, create a powerful, destabilizing force from within. His gaze fell upon Queen Maeve. Maeve was a paradox, a superpowered warrior, once genuinely idealistic, now a shell of her former self, drowning her disillusionment in alcohol and cynicism. She hated Homelander, despised Vought, and longed for a way out, but was too terrified of the repercussions, especially for her girlfriend, Elena. Red Skull saw her as a prime candidate for manipulation, a powerful weapon waiting to be aimed. Unlike Starlight, whose moral compass remained largely intact, Maeve had already crossed too many lines, her soul already scarred by Vought's corruption. She was a broken hero, perfect for Hydra's calculated machinations. Red Skull, through a highly secure, untraceable channel, began transmitting carefully curated intelligence directly to Maeve. Not demands, but whispers of truth. He sent her undeniable evidence of Vaught's cover-ups regarding innocent lives lost in soup skirmishes, not just the usual civilian collateral, but specific instances of Vought actively silencing families and fabricating accident reports. He detailed Homelander's casual disregard for human life, including discreetly recorded footage of Homelander deliberately escalating a minor incident to save more people for the cameras, causing unnecessary destruction. "These are not heroes, Queen Maeve," an electronically altered voice, devoid of any identifiable accent, stated in one of the encrypted messages. "They are performers, and you, a true warrior, have been reduced to their most celebrated prop. While you drown your sorrows, Vought constructs greater lies." The final piece of damning evidence was a digitally reconstructed recording of Homelander casually discussing Elena's vulnerability with Ashley Barrett, a veiled threat against Maeve's last remaining tether to humanity. It wasn't a direct order to harm Elena, but the chilling implication was clear. Elena was a leverage point, a weakness Homelander could exploit at any moment. This struck a raw nerve in Maeve, cutting through layers of self-loathing and cynicism. Maeve, already teetering on the brink, started to unravel. The constant reminders of Vought's evil, the grotesque pantomime she was forced to endure, and now the explicit threat to Eleanor solidified a cold fury within her. She sought out Starlight, pouring out her heart, desperate for a real ally. But Starlight, still navigating her own fragile resistance within the Seven, urged caution, fearing exposure and the immediate wrath of Homelander. This counsel, though well-intentioned, only deepened Maeve's isolation and reinforced Red Skull's insidious message. Vought could not be reasoned with, and traditional allies were too weak. It was then that Red Skull made his move. Not a direct recruitment into Hydra, but an offer of a different kind, an anonymous network of resources, untraceable communications, and advanced weaponry that could allow Maeve to strike back at Vought without exposing herself, or Elena, or so the message claimed. It was an alliance of convenience, framed not as loyalty to Hydra, but as a path to vengeance and protection. He played on her protective instincts, her warrior pride, and her profound sense of betrayal. "Imagine, Queen Maeve," the voice suggested in a subsequent message, "a weapon that could level the playing field, a means to make Vaught's gods bleed without revealing your hand. This is not about allegiance, but about retribution, about reclaiming your agency from the corporation that enslaved you." Maeve, her rage a cold, burning ember, considered the offer. It was a devil's bargain, she knew. This unseen benefactor was clearly dangerous, operating in the same morally grey shadows as Butcher. But unlike Butcher, who often reveled in chaos, this entity offered precision, a strategic mind that understood Vaught's vulnerabilities. She was tired of being a victim, tired of watching Homelander destroy everything she once held dear. She needed power, true power, to fight back. Meanwhile, Red Skull also exploited a rogue government element, specifically a disgruntled CIA field operative named Agent Monroe, who harbored a deep-seated hatred for Vaught's unchecked power, but lacked the means to fight it effectively. Monroe, a protege of Grace Mallory but far more aggressive and less scrupulous, had been quietly building a case against Vought for years, only to see it stonewalled by political influence. Red Skull's anonymous contacts supplied Monroe with undeniable evidence of Vaught's direct involvement in creating super-terrorists, not just through compound Vi distribution, but through active recruitment and deployment in conflict zones to justify military contracts for the Seven. This evidence, combined with access to Hydra's more conventional, untraceable weaponry, modified energy rifles and cloaking devices, presented Monroe with an irresistible opportunity. Monroe, driven by patriotic fervor and a deep-seated desire to bring Vought down, began covertly arming a small, elite Black Ops team with Hydra tech. He believed he was using a shadowy anti-Vought syndicate to fight fire with fire, unaware that he was merely a puppet in Red Skull's grander scheme. He aimed to expose Vaught's war crimes. Red Skull aimed to plunge the world into a new era of ideological warfare. The stage was set for a multi-pronged assault on Vaught's control. Maeve, armed with an unholy alliance and a thirst for revenge, would become a dangerous wildcard within the Seven, ready to turn against Homelander. Monroe's government Black Ops unit, now equipped with cutting-edge Hydra weaponry, would target Vaught's clandestine military operations, aiming to expose their global reach. Both factions, believing they were fighting Vought on their own terms, were merely pawns in Red Skull's game of chaos. He was not just infiltrating Vought, he was actively turning its own weapons, its own soups, its own government partners against it, ensuring that the inevitable implosion would be spectacular and leave a vacuum ripe for Hydra's iron fist. The Serpent was not just whispering, it was orchestrating a symphony of discord, preparing for the grand performance. The scale of the new threat slowly, terrifyingly dawned on Billy Butcher. It wasn't just a few fancy weapons on the black market or some corporate rats making Vought sweat. It was a methodical, ideological entity that operated with chilling precision, unlike anything he or the boys had ever faced. The reports from Frenchie and Kimiko were grim. Highly trained operatives, wearing sleek, unidentifiable uniforms, appearing and disappearing with unnerving efficiency, executing surgical strikes against targets no one else cared about. Obscure data hubs, abandoned chemical plants, and even small, forgotten research facilities that seemed to have no connection to Vault or Supes. They were ghost attacks, leaving little trace save for their unsettling efficiency. They're not after money, they're not after fame, and they're not even trying to kill Homelander directly, not yet anyway, summarized, poring over satellite images of a mysteriously vaporized warehouse. They're building something, Billy. Building an organization right under everyone's noses, and their tech. It makes vaults look like toys. Huey, looking pale, added, I managed to decrypt some of the scrambled communications from those black market weapons, Butcher. It's terrifying. They talk about order, about cleansing, about the purity of the cause. It's like a cult, but with military-grade hardware and no god but their own twisted vision. He thought of the casual cruelty, the almost academic coldness in the intercepted messages. These weren't Homelander's tantrums, these were meticulously planned acts of terror, each serving a grander, more sinister purpose. This ideological enemy, devoid of the usual super-ego or corporate avarice, profoundly disturbed Butcher. He understood psychopaths like Homelander, who were driven by primal needs for adoration and power. He understood cynical corporations like Vault, whose greed was their guiding principle, but an enemy driven purely by an abstract, brutal philosophy was a different kind of beast. It had no weakness he could exploit, no blackmail material that would make them flinch. They weren't interested in personal gain, only in absolute control. All right, enough with the philosophy lesson, Butcher snarled, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. We need to hit these fuckers hard, but how do you hit a ghost that's everywhere and nowhere? The gravity of the situation forced Butcher to confront an unthinkable proposition. His previous alliances had been with compromised government agents like Mallory or disillusioned Supes like Starlight, always with the ultimate goal of destroying Vault and its creations. But Hydra was a threat that transcended even Vault. If this organization, with its advanced tech and chilling ideology, managed to consolidate power, it would make Vault's corporate dystopia look like a walk in the park. This wasn't about revenge against Supes anymore, it was about preventing a global nightmare. He considered his options. The usual targets, local gangs, corrupt cops, even rogue Supes, were insignificant against this foe. He needed bigger guns, bigger brains, and that meant considering allies he would normally rather see dismembered. His mind grudgingly turned to Grace Mallory. The retired CIA deputy director had connections, resources, and a deep-seated hatred for unchecked power, albeit for different reasons, than Butcher. She was pragmatic, ruthless in her own way, and understood the shadowy machinations of global power. But even Mallory might balk at the scale of this new threat, or the compromises it would demand. More disturbingly, Butcher found himself contemplating a strategic, albeit temporary, alliance with a faction within Vault. Not the whole rotten corporation, but a desperate element caught between Homelander's escalating madness and Hydra's unseen hand. He knew Maeve was increasingly volatile, on the verge of snapping. Starlight, too, was becoming more aggressive in her resistance. Could they be leveraged? Could he exploit the internal fractures Hydra was so expertly widening? The thought made his stomach churn. Fighting fire with fire was one thing. Fighting fire with a darker, more insidious blaze, one that might burn him in the process, was another entirely. The breaking point came when Hydra's activities escalated from covert infiltration to calculated sabotage. A Vault-owned satellite, crucial for their global communications and Supe deployment, suddenly malfunctioned in orbit, crashing harmlessly into the ocean, but causing a massive disruption to Vault's network. The official story was a solar flare, but Frenchie's analysis of the wreckage fragments pointed to highly sophisticated targeted energy pulses. This was no accident. This was a direct, albeit deniable, strike. "They're testing Vault's defenses," MM concluded grimly. "They're cutting off their eyes and ears, preparing for something big. And if Vault can't see 'em, then Homelander sure as hell can't," Butcher added, his voice low and dangerous, "which means he'll be even more of a fucking loose cannon, kicking down doors and melting faces just to prove he's still in charge." The realization hit Butcher hard. Hydra was using Homelander's ego and Vaught's paranoia as a shield. They were creating chaos to mask their true intentions, subtly orchestrating the demise of their corporate rival from the inside out, turning the very forces of heroism against each other. This wasn't just about destroying Vault, it was about ensuring that whatever replaced it was far worse. He knew he couldn't fight this alone. The boys, for all their grit and limited resources, were outmatched. He needed more. He needed to make a bargain, a deal with the devil, even if it meant betraying his core principles. He saw the grim faces of his team, Huey's innocence fading, Kimiko's silent fury, Frenchie's worried glances, and MM's weary resignation. They looked to him for a plan, and the only plan he could conceive involved diving headfirst into a moral cesspool. "Right," Butcher finally declared, his eyes hard as flint. "We need to talk to Mallory, and then we need to talk to someone inside Vought, someone who hates Homelander enough to burn the whole fucking place down with us, even if it means getting a bit of their own blood on our hands." He knew this path was fraught with peril, that any alliance with a super or Vought insider was a slippery slope. But the alternative, a world under the heel of an ideological, technologically superior Hydra, was simply unacceptable. "We might have to become worse than them to beat them, Billy," MM warned, his voice heavy with foreboding. Butcher merely grunted, a cynical smirk twisting his lips. "Always knew that was on the table, didn't we, mate? Just hope we wouldn't have to play the full hand. But these bastards are forcing it." He was considering a pact that would push the boys into uncharted ethical territory, an alliance born of desperation, a terrifying gambit to save a world he barely recognized from a darkness he truly feared. The ideological war had begun, and Butcher was preparing to fight fire with a darker, potentially soul-destroying fire. The trap was sprung not with a bang, but with a meticulously orchestrated implosion. Red Skull had meticulously laid the groundwork for weeks, his Hydra operatives working tirelessly from the shadows. The public act of terror he planned wasn't a random attack, but a surgical strike designed to achieve multiple objectives: to utterly shatter public trust in Vought, to expose the inherent chaos of soup-controlled cities, and to destabilize the existing power structure enough for Hydra to step into the vacuum. This wasn't about mass casualties, it was about mass psychological disruption. The target was a seemingly innocuous sprawling data center on the outskirts of New York, privately owned, but housing critical infrastructure for a vast array of Vault's ancillary media and communications networks. At precisely 14 to the ST, a series of synchronized low-yield energy pulses delivered by Hydra drones disguised as innocuous municipal vehicles detonated within the center's core servers. The effect was not an explosion, but a cascading digital meltdown. Vought News Network went black, its 24/7 propaganda replaced by static. Vought-controlled internet service providers across several major cities experienced intermittent outages. The carefully cultivated digital facade of soup heroism flickered and died. Simultaneously, Hydra activated a dozen carefully planted sleeper agents within various low-tier Vought security and logistical teams. These agents, armed with advanced but non-lethal Hydra weaponry designed for disruption, initiated false flag attacks on other Vought properties, minor distribution centers, satellite PR offices, and even the personal residences of mid-level executives. The attacks were clumsy, visibly amateurish, designed to look like the work of enraged, desperate anti-super activists or rival criminal elements, further obscuring Hydra's true involvement. They were mere distractions meant to draw Homelander's attention and exhaust Vort's limited non-soup resources. But the true spearhead of Red Skull's offensive was more direct. Agent Monroe, the disgruntled CIA operative, believing he was launching his long-awaited strike against Vough's super-terrorist network, deployed his Black Ops team, fully outfitted with Hydra's advanced energy rifles and stealth suits, to intercept a Vought cargo plane rumored to be transporting Compound V to a destabilized African nation. The intel, of course, had been provided by Red Skull. Monroe's mission was to seize the Compound 5, expose Vough's global war profiteering, and broadcast his findings to the world. Maeve, her soul a festering wound of betrayal and rage, also received a coded message from her unseen benefactor, giving her the coordinates of the cargo plane and hinting at the true horrors Vought was unleashing globally. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was her chance for vengeance, her opportunity to finally break free of Homelander's oppressive shadow and expose Vought's crimes on her own terms. She took to the skies, a lone, furious warrior intent on intercepting the plane herself, unaware she was being steered directly into Hydra's meticulously constructed chaos. The cargo plane, flying over a remote stretch of desert, became the focal point of the nascent conflict. Monroe's team, cloaked and moving with military precision, rappelled onto the plane mid-flight. They quickly subdued the Vought security detail, their Hydra energy rifles making short work of standard body armor. As they breached the cargo bay, they found not vials of Compound V, but a horrifying sight: several dozen heavily sedated, genetically engineered super-terrorists, the very monsters Vought created to justify the existence of the Seven. Monroe's eyes widened in horror and grim satisfaction. This was the smoking gun. Before Monroe could transmit his findings, Maeve, crashing through the cargo bay door, landed with a violent impact, her eyes blazing. She saw the advanced weaponry, the sleek uniforms, and mistook Monroe's team for another clandestine Vought operation or rival soup traffickers. "What the hell is this, Vought?" she roared, launching herself into the fray. The ensuing chaos was brutal. Maeve, a powerhouse of strength and combat skill, tore through Monroe's Black Ops team, mistaking their advanced tech for enemy combatants. The Hydra weapons, while effective, struggled to penetrate Maeve's soup durability, forcing Monroe's men to fight a defensive, disorienting battle. Maeve, blinded by her rage and years of Vought-induced trauma, saw only enemies. Her rampage was a terrifying spectacle of unchecked power, collateral damage mounting even in the confines of the plane. Suddenly, a streak of red, white, and blue tore through the sky. Homelander, alerted to the digital anomalies and the disruption of Vaught's crucial supply chain, had arrived, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He saw Maeve destroying what he perceived as Vought assets, and a team of heavily armed, unknown assailants. To his narcissistic mind, this was a direct challenge to his authority, a betrayal on every front. "Maeve, you traitor!" Homelander screamed, his heat vision lancing through the fuselage, narrowly missing her. He saw the black-clad operatives, their advanced weapons, and immediately concluded they were mercenaries hired to undermine him. His understanding of the situation was entirely self-centered, his rage eclipsing any attempt at rational assessment. The battle inside the falling cargo plane became a terrifying melee. Homelander, unleashing his full power, became a whirlwind of destruction, tearing through Monroe's team with casual brutality, melting their advanced weapons, and even casually killing a few of the already sedated super-terrorists in the cargo hold. Maeve, now fighting both Monroe's desperate men and Homelander, was pushed to her absolute limit. She, focused her attacks on Homelander, trading devastating blows, the plane groaning under the impact of their superhuman conflict. Monroe, witnessing the utter chaos, the casual destruction, and Homelander's unhinged brutality, understood the horrifying truth. He had been played. He was a pawn in a larger game, his mission corrupted, his team being annihilated by the very heroes he sought to expose. Meanwhile, Red Skull watched from his secure command center, a faint, satisfied smile on his skull-like face. His mission was progressing perfectly. Vort's global network was fractured, its internal power players were turning on each other, and Homelander's true nature was being laid bare for any surviving witnesses. He had engineered a perfect storm, one that would cleanse the existing order with righteous fury, leaving the ground fertile for Hydra's insidious growth. The plane, scarred by heat vision and superhuman fists, began its final, uncontrolled descent. Maeve, battered and bloody, managed to tackle Homelander, sending them both careening out of the rapidly disintegrating cargo hold, tumbling into the desert sky. Monroe, amidst the wreckage and the dying screams of his team, clutching a battered data recorder containing the evidence of Vort's super-terrorists, knew his mission had failed, but a greater truth had been revealed. The chaos was not random, it was orchestrated, and the true enemy was not Vort alone, but a colder, more calculating force, one that made even Homelander seem like a predictable monster. The world was about to witness a brutal, multi-sided conflict, leaving a bloody void for Hydra to fill. The desert floor bore the fresh scars of the cataclysm. The remnants of the cargo plane lay scattered for miles, a testament to the brutal, multifaceted conflict that had just unfolded. Homelander and Maeve, battered and bruised, landed hard, their battle having raged through the plummeting wreckage until they were forced to separate to survive impact. Homelander, furious and disoriented, screamed into the empty expanse, his rage fueled by Maeve's perceived betrayal and the inexplicable chaos that had engulfed Vort's operations. Maeve, battered but alive, stared at the devastation, the bodies of Monroe's Black Ops team, and the horrifying evidence of Vort's super-terrorists, a cold clarity settling over her. She had been used, a pawn in a game far larger than her personal vendetta. Amidst the wreckage, Agent Monroe, miraculously alive but severely wounded, crawled from the twisted metal, clutching his recovered data recorder. His eyes, now clear of naive idealism, saw the landscape for what it truly was, a battleground orchestrated by an unseen hand. The exposed super-terrorists, the advanced weapons, Homelander's unchecked brutality, and Maeve's desperate rage, it was all part of a larger, colder calculus. He knew his true enemy now was not just Vort, but the insidious force that had so cleverly manipulated them all. The incident was, by Vort's standards, a public relations nightmare. News of a mysterious cargo plane crash and unidentified armed militants quickly hit the airwaves, immediately seized upon and amplified by Hydra's planted media assets. The Vort News network, still reeling from its digital outage, struggled to spin a coherent narrative. Homelander, refusing to adhere to any script, appeared on live television, blaming radical, anti-soup terrorists and promising brutal retaliation, his smile more terrifyingly unstable than ever. He pointedly omitted any mention of Maeve's involvement, choosing instead to focus his public fury on the unseen enemy, inadvertently playing right into Red Skull's hands. Red Skull, back in his secure command center, watched the unfolding chaos with an almost paternal pride. The public was terrified, Vort was exposed as corrupt and incompetent, and Homelander was further unhinged, making him a dangerously unpredictable force. The initial phase of his plan was a resounding success. The existing order was destabilized, its lies laid bare, its heroes revealed as monsters or puppets. The public's trust in Vought has plummeted by an estimated 37% in the last 6 hours, Agent Richter reported, displaying rapidly fluctuating polling data. The narrative of super-terrorists is being challenged by independent reports of advanced weaponry not linked to known groups. The market is in freefall. Vought is issuing emergency statements. Good, Red Skull rasped, a genuine flicker of satisfaction in his crimson eyes. The more desperate they become, the more mistakes they will make. The more chaos, the greater the opportunity for true order. He knew that Vought, in its panic, would double down on control. They would unleash more soups, more propaganda, more legal threats. Homelander would become even more unhinged, likely targeting anyone he perceived as a threat, further eroding public confidence. This was the perfect breeding ground for Hydra's ideology. When society shattered, when the heroes failed, the people would look for strength, for a clear vision, for order, and Red Skull would provide it. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Petrova, having successfully infiltrated Vaught's deepest genetic archives under Schmidt's guidance, transmitted a vast trove of compound VI data, including the complete, stabilized formula and the genetic profiles of thousands of super candidates, both successful and failed. This was the true prize, the blueprint for creating stable, powerful soups. Hydra now had the knowledge to not just replicate, but to perfect Compound 5, to create an army of ideologically pure, loyal super soldiers, not chaotic, celebrity-driven aberrations. Red Skull knew he couldn't conquer this world overnight. Vought, though wounded, was still a formidable entity. Homelander was still an almost unstoppable force, but he had fundamentally altered the game. He had shattered the illusion, ignited the flames of discord, and inserted his organization into the very core of this broken society. Hydra was no longer an external threat. It was an integral, cancerous presence, quietly spreading, adapting, and growing. Maeve, having witnessed the horrific truth, had vanished, her whereabouts unknown. But Red Skull knew she would be a continued destabilizing force against Vought, an asset he could perhaps leverage again in the future. Monroe, if he survived, would be discredited, his warnings dismissed as conspiracy theories, but his evidence would continue to fester in the darkest corners of the government, a constant, low-level threat to Vought's claims of innocence. The boys, now fully aware of a new, far more insidious enemy, found their world flipped on its head. Butcher's singular focus on killing Homelander suddenly seemed almost quaint in the face of an organization that sought to control the very essence of humanity. They had gained a temporary, bloody reprieve from Vought's immediate dominance, but at the cost of uncovering a far more terrifying truth. As the sun set on the burning wreckage and the screaming headlines, Red Skull began to draft his next directive. It detailed the establishment of secure, covert Compound Phi refinement facilities, the initiation of accelerated super soldier programs targeting compliant genetic profiles, and the expansion of Hydra's deep cover recruitment within key government and military institutions. He would allow Vought and Homelander to continue their self-destructive dance, to further alienate the populace, to erode the last vestiges of trust. Then, when the moment was ripe, when the people were truly desperate for a strong hand, Hydra would emerge from the shadows, offering a brutal but undeniable order. The age of the soup as a corporate product was ending. The age of the ideological super soldier was beginning, and this time there would be no capes, no celebrity endorsements, and no redemption. Only the cold, unforgiving march of a brutal, absolute order. Vaught's empire was crumbling, but what was rising in its place was far more insidious, a true serpent that had embedded itself in the very soul of the world, ready to coil and strike. The world, accustomed to the garish spectacle of Vaught's heroes, now reeled from a different kind of terror. Red Skull and Hydra had achieved a silent, insidious victory. Vought International, though still standing, was severely compromised, its digital infrastructure fractured, its public image in tatters, and its most powerful assets, Homelander and Maeve, either unhinged or in hiding. The orchestrated chaos had created a fertile ground for Hydra's ideology, exposing the fragility of a society built on corporate lies and false saviors. The boys found themselves in a terrifying new reality, their personal crusade against Supes suddenly overshadowed by a far more disciplined and ideologically driven enemy. Butcher's single-minded vengeance now felt almost naive in the face of a foe that aimed not just to kill, but to control the very essence of humanity. The lingering question was not if they could kill Homelander, but if they could even comprehend, let alone defeat, the ancient evil that had so seamlessly woven itself into the fabric of this broken world. The fight was far from over. It had merely shifted from the brightly lit stage of corporate heroism to the chilling shadows of an emerging, terrifying order, where the true gods were not born of Compound 5, but of an unwavering, brutal ideology. Some things can't be fixed. More stories await.